Wonderful to see you, to see so many members of the Wadham community. I see a lot of students, and welcome back to a lot of alumni, past students and their friends and family. It's a great gathering of Wadham and Oxford people, and from further afield. So welcome. If you're watching online, particular welcome. And some of you I know were present about 3 or 4 years ago when there was an event for the Ertegun Centre at the Maths Institute, where Melvyn talked a bit about the first volume of his memoirs back in the day, about his childhood in Wigton. And he said at the time he was planning to write a book on his time at Oxford and at Wadham, which is very exciting for us. And so here we are, 4 years later, for a conversation between Melvyn and Jane about Another World, which I'm sure many of you have read. It's a wonderful memoir. We're absolutely delighted to have you back, Melvyn. And Alice, your daughter, where's she gone? Oh, yes, there. Thank you very much for coming. Wonderful to see Jane, of course. Jane has not gone anywhere, but anyway, she's back. And thank you very much for taking part. And the way this is going to run is that Jane and Melvyn will have a conversation about the book, and then they will open it up for questions and discussion, and then we'll all go for drinks in the atrium. So without further ado, I'll hand it over to Jane and Melvyn.
Thank you very much. Well, it's lovely to be able to be part of this conversation. It's a real privilege and pleasure. And the idea is that, as Robert says, that we'll start by talking a little bit about the book. And not all of you perhaps will have read the book, so I'm going to at intervals read a little bit out of it, just to sort of contextualize it. But I wanted Melvyn really to start by provoking you about the title of the book a little bit. You spoke recently about your wonderful radio program, In Our Time, and you said it had a wholly misleading title. And I just thought I'd provoke you a bit about the title of this book. It's called Another World. And I noted, I hope I noted accurately, that I think you use that phrase 3 times in the book. And first of all, it's early on in relation to the young men that you see in the streets, and you say, this seemed another world. The second time, I think, is when your father comes to visit, and the second time, I'm wrong about that. The second time is when you talk about the mining working class community at home in Cumbria, and you talk about that feeling a very much another world from Oxford. And the third time is when you talk about the moment when you're splitting up with your girlfriend from Wigton, Sarah, and you're having a conversation, and she says it's another world, and it's clear that it's a world she doesn't want to be part of. And it seemed to me that was very interesting. The thing about your father I will come to later, perhaps, because that he talks about it being a different world, which is perhaps a slightly different thing. But reading your book and talking to you over the years, it seems to me in some senses, in some fundamental ways, Oxford was never a totally other world for you. That actually, in some ways, because Oxford was mapped for you on Wigton, and in a sense, Oxford is made familiar by association with Wigton throughout the book and throughout your life. Just as York, if you like, became Jerusalem when you went to a medieval mystery play on a school trip to York. That there's something very special about the interrelationship between Wigton and Oxford, and indeed Wigton and probably other places that you've lived in your life. And I'm just really compelled by the groundedness of the way in which you talk about your upbringing in Wigton, and the open approach of your parents, and the influence of your beloved history teacher, Mr. James, and how this seems to have contributed in a way. In one sense, all worlds are obviously other worlds for all of us, and we live through responding to difference. But there's something about the way in which you've responded to all this variety that seems very much grounded in that syncopation, if you like, with Wigton. And I just wanted to read a couple of little passages from the beginning of the book. One is about your arrival at Wadham, and you're walking up from the railway station, and you remember the map of the route because you've come up to take the entrance exam. And you pass from the station, as we're all familiar with, turn left at Worcester, etc. And then you come to Wadham and you say, left again to Wadham College. It was modest but classical, 17th century, plain, perfect. When I went through the gates, I felt that I had arrived in an unthreatening place for work. Centuries of it built to outlast and reshape all who entered. And then you say a couple of pages further on, it is still there in fresh memory, more than 60 years on, undiminished, a citadel of learning, a testament to what is good, perhaps what is unique about us, ceaseless curiosity, reaching out to know the answers to the ancient and modern questions that may never be solved, or rather like walking in the Lake District, where you come, as you think, to the top of a fell, only to look ahead and see, waiting for you, another higher, unvisited fell, and welcome it. And then I think very characteristically, your next sentence is, the only previous occasions on which I had sat at long tables eating with scores of strangers was at Butlin's Ayr, 3 years running in the early 1950s. And that's also very characteristic. I think you if we're threatening to become sentimental or possibly a bit, airy-fairy or grand, then you undercut it by a remark like that. But I think coming back to the serious point of what you felt about Oxford being a fundamentally important place seems to be rooted in Wigton, and so perhaps it's not entirely another world.
Well, I think that's true. It's quite a complicated, and it wasn't another world because I had so many personal connections with it, or I had a primary personal connection, which was my history teacher, Mr. James. Mr. James was son of a congregational minister in Madagascar, and he came over to this country, like a couple of his brothers, I think, and they were put in that sort of public school. And he came here to Oxford before the war, and then left almost immediately to go through the war, where he was a reconnaissance pilot, which was very dangerous and very dramatic. I mean, what you did, you got in a plane and you went behind the lines to take the photograph, and they knew you were coming because other planes didn't do that. He never told us about it. I didn't find out about it until much later. And if he'd said it, we would have stopped teasing him. We'd have stopped interrupting his lessons. We'd have had the greatest and deepest respect for him. But we didn't, and he didn't. And I was saying to you earlier, it's a bit of a cliche, really, but we're told, poets are the unacknowledged legislators of the world, and that might be, but not in my case. Not in the case of many people I knew. It's teachers who say, take that path, not that path, or I'll help you along there. I'll help you along there as well. It's they who take you the way that you want to go. And those teachers who have the knack of knowing the way you want to go and helping you along it are rare, and they're very, very valuable. And I was lucky with Mr. James. And so were other people. He became a token for a lot of people in my town, Wigton, small market town, 5,000 people, and the first woman to come to Oxford, Pauline Prince, was from Wigton, and she had difficulties. Her father had a flat cart, which is exactly what it is, a flat cart with two wheels on and a pony, and he used to go around to farmers trading one sort of junk for another, really, and trying to pass it on to others. And Pauline's mother was a big friend of my mother's, and she was very ill. And Mr. James saw that and just helped her along and helped her to come here. and she did very well here, and we still keep in touch. She's at a school. So I'm drifting away a bit now, but the connection was a personal connection. And also other people from our school came here, and they just came to Wadham because Mr. James got you into Wadham, really. I think your dad refused.
But also your parents were obviously very supportive as well.
Oh, my parents were terrific.
Yeah.
I was very, very lucky with my parents. They did sensible things as well. When I was about 15, almost everybody in my class left school. The boys went back to their farms or into their father's businesses. Michael Saunderson's family, his family, and they drifted away. Dad saw this was happening, and he saw that I didn't quite know what to do with myself, because these chaps were making money, about 15 shillings, 18 shillings a week. So he immediately gave me a job in the pub. It wasn't a silly job, it was a proper job that I had to do every day. And it was carrying up all the crates from the bottom of the pub, cleaning, sweeping the front of the pub. It was a big front, so the lorries could land there, and so on and so forth. And that was very valuable, because I had to do it, and I wanted it, and it was incredibly embarrassing, because you had to sweep a front, a very deep front, so that the beer lorries could stump there. But across there was the parking place for school buses, and the school buses would swill round and stump there as I was sweeping the front. Well, it was an ordeal to keep sweeping without listening to the jeers. Anyway, we got through that. It was just he did very sensible things. He was an extremely clever man, my father. He passed a scholarship when he was young to go to a Liverpool public school, but of course he wasn't allowed to go because they didn't have the money. So he didn't go. And then he passed a scholarship to go to a local grammar school, and they didn't have the money for that. Mm. So he just went on to the parish school and got on with his job. He had all sorts of jobs. But I was very lucky with his kindness, and because he was very clever, he understood how to look out, and we liked talking to each other. Anyway, that's enough. I can talk about him all day if you really want.
No, but there's a lovely passage in the book where you recall, in a sense, in various places you recall significant moments through the eyes of those you loved or those who were your friends, which I think is a lovely way of constructing a memoir in a sense. But there's a lovely passage where you talk about your father coming in. You have tea with Lawrence Stone, who is one of the history tutors here. And you, if I can just read this little passage, you say, "I saw his scan of the bookshelves in the historic and lovely room. I thought I could hear him think. Later he said to me, I would just like to have sat down and been able to read anything I wanted, just to be in a place like that and read those books. I saw that gaze, not of envy, but wonder that there were lives that could be lived like this, and his son was part of it. Mr. Stone's unaffected kindness and the resonance of the room on which Mr. Stone had delivered a brief history had transported my father into a different world. He would never forget that visit. This was for him a perfect place, partly because it was for me, but also because he knew in a way he had not known before, that this place, the books, the scholarly attention of Mr. Stone, represented a world he had never even dreamt of and would never encounter again, and I was living it." And then you go off and a bit later in this passage, when you're walking away from Lawrence Stone's room, your father asks, "Does he talk like that all the time?" And you say, "A bit, but not quite like that. I think he was just enjoying himself and hoped that you were." I certainly was. Wonderful being able to listen to a man like that every day. My father was silent for a few moments. I responded for him. He wants, I don't know how to say it, to open things up, to make us think harder or in a different way, and even play games just to show what's possible. "Well, I'll never forget it," said my father. "I'll make sure never to forget it. He made me see what it's all about, that's for certain. For certain. What a good man."
He was, yes.
And that's a lovely...
Yes. I think they got on very well. Lawrence Stone was an exceptionally good academic, as you know, and teacher. He'd also been through the war, like my father. A lot of the people there had been actively through the war for 4 or 5 years, and they just got on very well. There's also a very strong Wickham connection, which you didn't read, which Wickham had a clothing factory, 2 factories, one for making, replacing clothes. They sent this suit up and asked for a replica to come back. That was the one way they did it. And the other factory was they made cellophane paper you put around cigarette packets. And it was, that did quite well, because there was only one other in Warrington that did that, so that was okay. But this business of
Lawrence and the suit.
Lawrence, yeah. Well, he was very, very pleased, because after he got to know me, after 2 or 3 encounters, he said, "Wigton," he said. I said, "Yes." "Redmayne's?" I said, "Yes." He said, "I said my suit's to be remade." "Redmayne's?" I said, "Really?" He said, "Yes. Look at this." "It'll never fade." Remember? And he was very, very pleased with that. And he made this bond. He kept saying, "Oh yes," and then he pursued it. "What did she do?" I said, "She made buttons." "This is your mother?" "Yes, she made buttonholes. She made buttonholes." And he said, "Right. I'm teaching somebody who can make buttonholes. Good God." And it was very helpful from then on.
But that was a lovely connection. I mean, that again encompasses this sense of that being a totally equal exchange, as it were. And also with your father. I mean, that, as you said, it's not envy. It's just actually feeling something.
Yes, I feel very moved by it now, because they did get on very well. I think it was to do with the war thing. They were very equal. They'd been through a lot of years of war. Each of them had been through the war for 5 years or so, and had different experiences, not always good. But Dad was just fascinated by, we were in that beautiful room at the front, where the Royal Society is supposed to stand. And he was just looking, it was like taking a panorama of the room. While he was talking, he was going around all these books that you could read if you wanted to. So that was a big thing in my life. And Mr. Stone was a wonderful teacher. I did, after a very short time, wonder why he was wasting his time with us, to tell you the truth, because he was getting on with an extremely successful historical career, and then he moved to America and was head of something at Princeton. But he still plenty of time. We read our essays to him. He read them back in his own way, which was sort of 3 times as good, and you wondered, what's he bothering for? No, I was lucky that. And Mr. Thompson was another good teacher, but there's something special about Mr. Stone.
Your relationship with Lawrence Stone. But I mean, that in a sense pervades the whole book. I mean, and you have that encounter with Dennis Potter, where you know, who was wanting to sort of make a class statement in a very sweeping way, and you say quite rightly that you can't generalize about these.
No, you can't generalize. No, Dennis, sometimes you think, when you look back on things like Oxford, sometimes you think the things you remember you're making up, because they're so sort of neat. I mean, I did meet Dennis Potter outside Trinity College. I had not met him before, but I'd read about him. There's been a film made about him. It was called The Glittering Coffin. It was on television. But I hadn't met him. And I knew about, and he strode up to me and he said, "I know who," he said. And I didn't know him, so I waited. And he said, "Melvyn Bragg, isn't it?" And I just held my peace, thinking, what's coming next? And he said, "They say there's 3 really working class people in Oxford," he said. This is Potter. He always had to do it. He said, "There's me," he said, pointing at himself.
That's the first person.
"That's you," he said, pointing at me. where's the other bugger? Well, the other bugger was all over the place. There were lots of other buggers, but it didn't suit Dennis's style to give it away so easily, as it were. No, so yes, there were lots of people. In terms of, as it were, getting to know other people, Wadham was very easy for that. People basically good-natured. I helped that on my floor, on my staircase 2, there was Blakely, Bomford, Bragg, Burke, and somebody else I can't remember. We were all on the same staircase, but we used to come out and go to sip supper together and so on, so got to know people easily. It was a very easy experience to get into, to tell you the truth. I played a bit of rugby, not well. They had a good rugby team, but when you go to a small college, if you're big enough and daft enough, they'll put you for the team sooner or later. So I knew 15 people right away. So there was that. So that was a help. I sang a bit in the choir. There was one wonderful lad who was a chorister, and so that's a help. Meet another bunch of people, and then quite soon, you're on nodding terms with most of the people in the college, and that was just a warm thing to have. And then close terms, the people I mentioned Burke and Blakely and Robin Bomford and so on, became very close friends for the rest of my and their lives. And that was unexpected, because I'd got very close friends back in Wigton.
Yeah.
Then I started to take them back to Wigton.
Yeah.
And it was quite interesting, because when we were living in the pub then. We had a little flat above a pub, and 2 single rooms, and my parents' room. And when my cousins came, Jeff and all the others, we slept head to tail. When the guys who'd been to public school came to stay with us, my mother sort of was scratching her head. What do we do now, really? And so I suggested head to tail. She wouldn't hear of it. So she got Andrew, the lodger, to move to another place so he could have the room on his own. That was quite a big hitch, really. I'm just gabbling on, but there were little hitches, but they never became big ones. What surmounted them was people's good nature.
Yeah. But also, I mean, you emphasise throughout the book, you use the word kindness a lot. Lots of people being kind and generous. And,
yes, they were.
And obviously, you didn't waste any time sort of feeling, I suppose, you seem not to waste any time anyway, worrying about other people's privilege or whatever. You just got on with it and
yes.
And
I
made the most of opportunities.
I went to the Oxford Union the first time, and I'd done a lot of debating in Cumberland, because the schools had debating societies. Each school had, and they competed against each other. And I listened to this, and I saw these chaps standing up in white ties and that, and I thought, it's not for me. It's really, really not for me. I'm not staying here. So I finished that debate. I should have stayed, really, but I didn't. I finished, and I never went back. I didn't think it was what I wanted to do.
No, but that's
it didn't bother me.
Straightforward decision.
And they were very good. They were going to go on, and some of them did, to become members of the cabinet, running places having political positions in Nigeria and so on and so forth. They had very distinguished careers, but I knew that wasn't where I was going. But it was an easygoing place, Wadham, and of course helped by this bombastic warden. Said to be almost as bombastic as Isaiah Berlin, and the only way they could really meet was to sit back to back and talk.
In opposite directions.
Absolutely, and Bauer cherished his sayings, which were repeated again and again and again. So most of you have heard them 5 times, but he really did. There was a man called Albert Moth, who came from Argentina. And he was a student here, and he went and Bauer had these 6 or 7 people regularly to have sherry. It's always sherry. I hated sherry, but I really, really hate sickly sherry. But anyway, you drank it out of politeness. And at one stage he said, Albert Moth said, how do you decide who to let in? So, do you know this line? How do you decide? And of course, this was meat and drink. The bar. I said, well, travel boys, pretty boys, no shits. So there you go. At least I wasn't a shit. And he was very good, though. He was very good at just being nice to you. I remember when he wanted, the man who was teaching, I did a town on Renaissance as a special subject, and I couldn't get hold of a book I wanted. And he said, oh, come on, I'll lend you. And I took the books and handed it away. No, keep it. And that meant an immense amount. And so that sort of kindness with brilliant teachers and very nice company. The people I've talked about, Robert and Ulick and Alan, they became close friends, as close as friends as you're likely to have. So all that was good. All that was good.
And you also became the film critic of Charwell.
Yes, yes, that was a result of a man called Michael. Yes, Michael Wolfers, who was
whose window you climbed through.
Yes, Michael had a window on the front, and if you knew him, you could go and knock on his window at any time in the night, and he'd open it, and you could get in without having to go through the door and all that sort of thing. It was very useful. But he knew everybody. He was one of those social people. He was brilliant. He had an awful background. His parents had been killed in the war, and they were brought up by a Quaker family. And then he came here, and he was garrulous, brilliant, and
nocturnal.
very fun.
And nocturnal.
And nocturnal, yes. I was talking once about having seen a film by Ingmar Bergman, and he said, "Oh, you should be a film critic." It had never occurred to me to be any sort of critic. He said, "Oh, I'll fix it," and so he fixed it. I became Charwell's film critic, and I had a hell of a good time. Gone in for nothing. That's the main thing. Got to know. There was a sprinkling of continental films coming in then, Bergman and Truffaut and all the rest of them, just Visconti, but not as determinedly as this. And it was wonderful having to go and then write it up and then be criticised by the people in the college saying, "You should have said that, you should have said that," but still it was happening, and that was a good treatment. And it was particularly as taking me close to the man who became my hero is the wrong word, but not all that wrong a word. I became completely attached to the view of Ingmar Bergman through his films. There was something in his films that I'd never seen in films. And I used to go to the movies a lot because we got free tickets. If you had to put posters up in the pub, you got free tickets. So we went there. So a lot of films, but nothing like this before. Nothing like Visconti, but nothing like Bergman. So I wrote to him, and he wrote back, and I wrote a book about him, and went to Munich to talk about him.
And you gave him an idea.
Yes, I did. Oh, dear, yeah. Well, that's one of the embarrassing things. Yes, I got the cottage we had in Cumberland, little cottage. Well, not that little. There's a cottage with a barn attached. We turned the barn into a big anyway. And it was about a mile and a half from the pub. And we used to drink quite a bit in those days. And anyway, I was coming back very late from the pub one night, wending up this, so I knew the way anyway, got there and picked up the phone. I don't know what, God help us, but I rang Bergman very late at night or early in the morning, whichever way you put it, and said, "I've had a great idea for a film." And I live in a place which is very like where you are, you know, and there's these two brothers and these twin sisters, and it's how they get on or they don't get on. I mean, that's what sort of happens, really. And I burbled on. There was complete silence, and I put the phone down, And I went to bed, woke with a terrible headache, and oh Christ, oh Christ. And the phone rang. And I picked it up. I said, "This is Ingmar Bergman. Thank you." So that was my best encounter. Then I did make a film with him, about him, obviously. I think film about him was as much for him to learn English, because he wanted to be interviewed in English. He wanted to talk more English. So he went to Munich, where he'd been sent to Munich because he fiddled his taxes or something. And I went to Munich to spend some time with him, and we just talked English all the time. He was a wonderful man. But I couldn't understand, and I still can't understand why his way of looking at life was so like the best contemporary novels I was reading. It was another dimension. Films were films and novels were novels, but he cut underneath it all the time. And I was fascinated by him. And right to be, and was till the end of my life. Just thought he was a quite unique film director, which gave me a dimension into things that I'd never had before. I decided after I left this place and got this fluky scholarship to the BBC and started to make films. You just saw what could be done, which I wouldn't have been able to if I hadn't had the nerve to talk to him.
Hadn't been the film editor at all.
Yes, I'm all film editor of Charles, yes, yeah.
But you had an extraordinary, obviously, series of encounters with amazing people like Ken Russell and all these sort of. It must have been an extraordinary time to be going into the BBC and going into that world.
It was, yes, and it was. We were very lucky, very lucky.
Well, not just luck. I mean, you obviously made something of the luck, if you like.
Anyway, I always remember they interviewed you to death at the BBC in those days. Anyway, and I finally got from this number to that number to that number to that number, and the last number of us, I was asked one question because they all thought they could get you, and they said. Apparently, pretending to be innocent, imagine the guys on the board being, "What do you think of the situation in Albania?" I'd read the Times that morning, unusually, because I usually had a book, but I couldn't book, so I bought a Times and had a big article on Albania. So I went for him on that. Very impressive, I thought, and one or two other things. And Mr. Martin Eslin, I was very fond of. He was a translator of into English of plays, and a serious intellectual, and very, very distinguished indeed. He came up to me in the canteen a few days after they'd taken me in, and you can't forget certain things, and he stood above me and he said, "You enjoying it?" I said, "Yes." He said, "They didn't want you, you know." You don't forget that, do you? They didn't, it was very, and he beamed his head. They didn't want you, you know. So I got in that way. They're also, and then I loved it. I couldn't believe it was the work, really. Not something silly. I just thought I wanted to go every day. I wanted to do what they wanted me to do. People there were very kind and helpful. It was a dream. It was a dream. And also we were at a time where a lot of younger people going in were keen on showing how good they could be at making films. They wanted to show how good they could be. It had been rather formal, set off. You did an arts film like that, and it was like that and that. You did that, and it was classical, and it was this, and people said, "Well, why don't we do it like that? Or why do it like that?" And they started messing about and changing about. And then Ken came in, Ken Russell, and changed an awful lot. Humphrey Burton was there, of course, who was a very fine producer, and they began to...
You had the South Bank show.
Pardon?
The South Bank show.
Well, that was later.
Yeah.
South Bank show was after I left the BBC. Humphrey left Aquarius at ITV and said, "Why don't you come and take over Aquarius?" And because I wasn't in charge of anything at the BBC Arts, I just did stuff. So anyway, I did, and I took to. First of all, Humphrey was very pissed off that I changed the name from Aquarius to the South Bank Show, and I must have said this to some of you before when Ingrid Bergman said I was going to do an interview with her. I said, "Well, an interview," and she said, "Well, what are you going to call this new program of yours?" And I said, "Oh, the South Bank Show." She said, "Is that the best you can do, Mr. Bragg?" And it was actually. Well, I thought the
Didn't translate into speed.
Well, the South Bank was on the back of newspapers at the South Bank. There's South Bank. So I'd got an instant, and Michael Grade, who put the show on the end of everything, just banged show on the end of it. So it was a South Bank show. Now TSBS, it clicked in with Andrew Lloyd Webber's dun 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 16 syllables, 16 bang, that gives us our titles. So we were up and running then. And people piled in. And what we did then, about 4 or 5 of us, we just decided to talk about quality and not about what was received quality. We thought that a lot of popular singing, of course, McCartney was there, and a lot of popular jazz, and a lot of soul music, and a lot of television plays I thought were better than the plays I was going to see in the West End, but we never had them on television, so we just broke into that area. And it didn't take much breaking in because everybody's ready for it, and it built from there on. So I was lucky with that.
I mean, in a way, all your career has been a series of conversations that you've created with people about interesting things, in a sense. I mean,
well, yes, people were ready to be talked to.
Yeah,
They wanted to be talked. Yes, and I liked talking to them. Yes, it wasn't, and you couldn't quite believe it, you know. It was. I remember, sort of an Alice in the fantasy world. You would actually ring up Norman Mailer and say, "Do you mind if I come to America and interview you?" You actually said that on the phone to Norman Mailer, and you thought you said things on the phone to people like Norman Mailer, didn't you? And they said, "Yes, we've heard about this, right? When can you come over?" And so that was a treat.
Yeah.
So yeah, we were
again
very lucky.
taking things serious. I mean, taking serious things into that world of popular.
And what we did always was to shoot far too much, which meant that we could have a stockpile, which is, I think, could come into its own now when we look back on it and try to put these archives together, because they're massive archives, and we could only use a third of it, and so there's all that waiting to be shown. So I was very, very lucky, and worked with people who were first rate. And we just got on with it.
And you were writing at the same time?
Well, yes, I was writing at the same time. There's always, yes, maybe it wasn't a good idea, but anyway, I was. Yeah. I suppose if I didn't get writing now, I wouldn't get writing ever. So there we are.
We'll open it up to general discussion. I just wanted to end this part of our discussion with, again, a little reading from the book, which is about your writing a short story on an afternoon in Oxford when you had a gap in your schedule, as you put it. And you said, "I remember starting it out of nowhere, finishing it in about 4 hours, rather bemused at seeing the 3 filled pages." And again, I think characteristically, it's set in the Georgian mansion where your mother went to clean a couple of days a week, near Wigton, and you said you showed it to nobody and you made no copies and you lost it. But you said it did, however, send out a signal to whom? Myself. I could do it. Whatever the outcome, I could and I would write from then on, if only to rediscover that happy days, D-A-Z-E. It soon became clearer than that. As soon as I left university, I started a routine of writing, which over the last 60 years I have pursued. It is the doing of it, of letting a pen draw out thoughts and actions, establish it in some lucky cases an indivisible bond. Silence speaks out of silence to silence. Words alone evoke words which, if the writer is good enough or lucky enough, and the reader receptive, act like a transplant. It is strong magic, and for me it makes life work. Like all other writers, it makes sense at the time and satisfies an impulse as convincing as it is fugitive. I would like to think that the writing I have done since Oxford, was seeded in that first afternoon in Wadham, in the sense of finding a unique satisfaction in just starting and finding a story that for me rang true.
Yes, yes, yeah, yes. I think just finding it and doing it, it's the doing of it. It always has been the doing of it. I mean, unless you're a cast iron and lucky egomaniac, you don't think it's, how can anybody judge it? And you mostly think, oh, come on. But if you stick at it, and it does mean something to yourself, and it's always yourself you're trying to please. It's always the rewrite that's important. Well, here's me. What do I know? People in this room know far more than I do. Anyway, that's the way I work. People work in different ways.
But it all started here.
It all started, yes, it did. And I remember the day. It was in this college, and it was wet. And I was in my room in staircase 2, and just started to write it. It was set in a Georgian farmhouse outside Wigton, run by a woman whose husband had been killed on the first day of the war, Second World War. I knew their children. My mother went and cleaned the house. Annette and Georgie were children. And it was, and other people joined in. So something was going on there that wasn't going on anywhere else. I don't know, it just started to work for me. I liked doing it. I'd always written a bit at school. I mean, I'd written poetry when Mr. Blacker, the English teacher who'd been a spy in Czechoslovakia. And I want a couple of poems from you, Melvyn Bragg. 12 lines will do. It did for Shakespeare. So 12 lines it was. And I remember some of them, but you're not going to hear them.
As you said, you've got to start somewhere.
Yes, I just like doing it. I think I don't know what other writers do, what other writers, other painters, they do what they want to do, but they've got to do it because they like it. I mean, I'm doing something again. I've done an awful lot of work with David Hockney, and he just loves doing it. I remember once we were filming in his place in France, and we'd finished for the day, and we were all packing up, and we couldn't find him. And we looked around the farm, and in a back room in the farm, he's painting away. He's supposed to be on a bus taking us all to the next place, but he just won't stop. Can't stop doing it. And that's, I mean, he's a star example. I'm nothing like that. But it catches you. It catches you, I suppose, wanting a voice. And if you're lucky, it works, and sometimes it does, sometimes it doesn't.
Great, well, thank you so much, Melvyn. And let's over to you to ask any questions you'd like. I think somebody's going to wander around with a microphone. Nancy, are you going to?
First of all, thank you, Melvyn. You're just so talented, and I think Wadham helped you use your talent even more. But what I'd like to say is, when you were at Wadham at that time, obviously I know you did venture out a bit further. You paid a visit to the Carfax Assembly Rooms, but what other things did you do or remember from Oxford? You know, did you, say, walk in the Matthew Arnold fields, go further afield? Did you go to the Oxford Playhouse, or did you even go to Marks and Spencer's? You know.
Well, I went to the Oxford Playhouse as often as I could. There was a very good run of actors and plays put on at the Oxford Playhouse at that time. Plays I'd read about but never seen. That was very good. So I went there as often as I could. And I wandered around. I liked wandering outside Oxford around the little villages. Not very far, but far enough. I made a huge discovery once, which I've still got at home, which is a head about that size. It was obviously an ornamental head from a wall that had been built, and somebody had knocked it over. It was in a ditch. And so I picked it up in this ditch. It was quite heavy, and took it back to Oxford. I didn't know what to do with it. So I took it to Mr. Lawrence's place, thinking he'll know what to do with it. He didn't know what to do with it. He nicked it. From then it was called Bragg's Head. And so he didn't try to find out whose wallet had fallen off or anything. So I wandered around a lot. I liked walking on my own a lot. And I liked walking around Oxford a great deal. It's a wonderful place to get to know. And I like the fact it had good pubs. And not that I was a big drinker, but I came from a pub. And I liked good pubs, good this, good that, good the other. I mean, remember Johnson, when a man is tired of London, he's tired of life, because London is all that life can afford. Well, you can say that about Oxford in my lifetime. Yes, I wandered around a lot. I liked poking about. And I liked the comparisons. I mean, it was silly comparisons, but the little back alleys in Wigton, which was originally a sort of late 16th, early 17th century, sort of the core of it, a little labyrinth. It was tiny little slits between. But it seems the same here. You go down the street, the little slit road, little slit. I felt very at home there, very comfortable there. It was just a very friendly place to be. All the worries about, oh, there'll be class consciousness. Well, there was from idiots, but you just avoided the idiots. Basically, people were pleasant, getting on with their lives, and some of them were remarkable people. And some of them I was lucky enough to know for the rest of their lives. No, it was a good place to be. I'm sure it happened to other colleges, I don't know. But it was a very good place to be that time in my life.
Melvyn, thank you very much for that. It's very interesting. I read the book with great appreciation, but I was astonished at your recall. Did you keep a diary in those days?
No.
Then I'm even more astonished.
I've never kept a diary. It's almost on principle. I think that I can remember, what I remember will have more resonance than what I've written down 4 or 5 years ago. And I read it again and I think, what the hell did I write that down for? As to when I'm working on it, I think, oh, well, that's what, he would have said something like that. I did say something. And some things you remember, like, you know, they didn't want you, you remember that. Even if I went along, I could go along with my conscience in terms of the dialogue, because I remembered it quite well.
I remember you saying before that part of that was cultivated when you were at home and your mother sent you on errands.
Yeah.
And she expected you to have observed what was going on, and she would ask you, she did things on the way back.
Yes, they did. They expected a lot out of you in terms of memory. A big shopping list at the co-op and so on. But yeah, I did. I preferred my memory to my notes.
It's fascinating in another world how you form these friendships, whether in Wigton or at Wadham, and over again you say, and we're still in touch. And this incredible gift for friendship, but I think that comes from your curiosity, obviously, but speaking as a biographer, you're a brilliant biographer, and it feels like that was something from your parents or just discussing people at home it started?
Well, I don't know. My dad was a good storyteller. I don't know really. But actually it was to elaborate it and perhaps to pontificate. An easy trap, isn't it? Is people told each other stories all the time. They didn't sit round a pub fire telling stories, but stories came out. You know that Duff Bugger's gone and done. That's the start of a story, and they just wove in. He's done that again. He hasn't, has he? Yes, she has. No, she's not done that. Oh, for God's sake! And that was part of the thatch, without any question. That was, so. There's no exaggeration there. And what other conversation was there going to be in the town? And in the town, you must remember that the town was the streets. Most people had awful houses. Our first house was terrible, the bottom of Union Street. It was as damp as damp as you could think. There was 1.5 rooms upstairs and 1 room downstairs, crushed against other things. I didn't notice how horrible it was until we left it. But what you talked about was what was going in a very tight little community. Is this better? Is that better? How are you getting on? Can I help you? And people were helping each other. Now, I'm not talking about people helping each other like the Salvation Army, although the Salvation Army is very important. Just mingling in with each other. It was quite clear that you had to help other people or you would be sunk. That's over emphatic, but I think it's true. Unless you helped each other, you were sunk. And it's remarkable how many people in Wigan emigrated as soon as they could. Australia, New Zealand, Canada, America, they bunked off because it wasn't a nice place to live. You didn't have nice housing. You didn't have great opportunities for education. What you did is you left school when you were 14 or whatever it is and got on with it. So I liked it. I mean, I just liked it a lot. There you go.
Just a slightly different question. Did you know many scientists during your time at Oxford, and did your interest in science develop at Oxford or later during your career, when obviously you did a lot of programs that involved scientific topics?
Well, in terms of, that's a very piquant question. I was instructed at the age of 14 to choose physics or chemistry or biology. Physics, chemistry, or there wasn't that and. One of them was that for some reason or other, and I chose biology, which was a bad choice because I wasn't very good at it, but not physics, not chemistry. So that's the answer to that. The sciences were left to that side. We were run by a teacher, headmaster, Mr. Stowe, who was a very good linguist, had been a major in the war. He was very good, several languages, and he developed that. And Mr. James was a historian. Mr. Blacker was an English teacher. They held to the sort of centre of the idea of the school. So I didn't have much to do with it at all. I didn't take physics O-level, never mind A-level. And that's one of the reasons when I started to do in our time, I was very keen on doing science subjects because I wanted to find out about it. And I think that's why a lot of people listened. A lot of people that had an inadequate education, like me. And they got a chance to do it, to listen to it. That's why it heaped up. It's in archives all over the world, and heaped up. And what we want to do, which I'd like to do, is to go back and get bundles of them, because there's been hundreds and hundreds and hundreds of them by some of the greatest scientists, and start to put them in order to see if we can make anything of it. But that's a big job, and I'm not up to it at the moment. No, science. There were some good scientists. There's a man called Alan Hewer. Interesting that his name comes after after coal mining. The man who did most work in a coal mine was the Hewer, Hewer, and that was his family name, Hewer. He went to the West Coast and America, and had worked in one of the high-tech places and did very well there. Otherwise, I don't remember anybody being all that interested in doing it to pass the exam, the O-level, the A-level, but not giving it to take it on, which is a pity. Still, they could catch up within our time.
Hello. Like you, I like to think that I came from a very similar background. I came from a council house. My father was a plumber, and through an inspirational teacher, I ended up in Wadham. That was about 40-odd years ago. But even now, I think at this time, 40 years later, I still perceive that there's an idea that there's privilege here, that people have to somehow break in. And yet, even 40 years ago, when I was here, I didn't feel that. You obviously didn't feel that. I didn't feel that. I made some lifelong friends. I was well accepted. I had a wonderful time from that background. Do you perceive this sort of idea that there's going to be a barrier to enter here from more normal backgrounds?
I think it varies from college to college. I mean, I've met people since have been, say, at Trinity College, where they've had an awful town surrounded by snobs. We didn't have any of that here. It really didn't. It wasn't ideal. I think it was ideal, actually, come to think of it. We didn't have any of that. But, people just feel, you know, people like David Coate, who wrote a novel about his time in the Second World War, came here, got a first, went to All Souls and so on. They were, well, good for him. It wasn't something that gained him great, well, obviously distinction, but nobody said we've all got to be like that, because that's the way life is. I think Wadham had a very good feeling of, we'll take it as it comes along. I don't think people set each other's side. I mean, Barra did, but that was as much for fun as anything else, you know. I remember we were going out to play rugby once, and he said, a few of us were walking down the court, about to go out and have a game of rugby, and he said, "Where are you going?" He said, or something that's even more abrupt than that. And somebody said, "We're going to play rugby. Who are you playing against?" Oriel. "Oh, you must win. Those boys get their scholarships away if you don't win." And we get our scholarships if we go the wrong way around.
The wrong way around, yeah, exactly.
We were very, I mean, the top and bottom of it, as I felt, I was very, very lucky to be in Wadham. I was lucky to be in Oxford, and I was lucky to be in Wadham. I'm sure people feel just as lucky in other colleges, but from everything I've known since, and from everything I knew when I was there, I felt I was very lucky to be in this college. It had everything. It was very grounded and very multiple, you know. David Olstein going for a scholarship into Polish film industry. Somebody else, Dan Klein, singing at lunchtime and the piano here, singing wonderful songs, practicing his own. It was a big mix, and I think we all benefited from it.
Well, certainly everybody's benefited from your carrying that forward into your career.
Well, yes.
Always.
I suppose the idea was, yes, yeah, enough of me.
But again, I think, you know, it is that, for me, it's that syncopation between Wigton and Oxford which really has characterised that sort of groundedness. And again, perhaps I think we should draw to a close before we disperse and have a drink and let Melvyn off the hook. But again, there's a lovely detail in the book, I think, when you're reading a very long essay to Lawrence Stone about early Christianity in Britain, and you end this little section of discussing how much you were excited by that, by talking about Lindisfarne and the North Country, that side of the country, and you say the core of scholarship at Wadham itself could be seen as a direct descendant of those Celtic monks who walked to Lindisfarne and from there went down the east coast and sailed across the sea to enlighten the Holy Roman Empire. Yes. I think that's the right way round, isn't it?
Right. Yeah. Yes, I was very struck by Lindisfarne and by the that's a period. In fact, because I knew nothing about it. I mean, at school we'd gone through various historical things, which were more or less most people did, but for some reason or other, I got intoxicated with the story of early English life, the so-called Northumbrian Athelstan. I like Athelstan, particularly Ethel and Stan. Ethel was my mother's name, Stan was my father's. So I had a deep, profound, meant to be, yes. And then we went across. We went across to the country from Cumberland across to Lindisfarne, watched out for the tides, and it was just. It's amazing that to be in a place, you realise that in this little place, these amazing scripts had been written in order to carry forward this particular work, and it had been successful. Yeah. And then they'd said that it's gone down the east coast, York had gone down, and then it had gone over into Europe, and so on. And that had happened there. So to be at a place where something had happened so rawly.
Yeah. Right. Well, thank you so much, Melvyn. It's been wonderful talking to you.
Thank you very much, Jane and Melvyn. It's been a wonderful conversation, and I'm struck both by the warmth and affection and humour that comes through this, and indeed runs through the book for anyone who has yet to read it. But as a less bombastic warden, I'm also struck by the fact that you say how lucky you were to be at a place like Wadham and the atmosphere of a place like Wadham. I'm very struck that that Wadham is as it is because of people like you and Jane and the many other people I look around the room and see. And we've been very lucky to have you, and particularly lucky to have you chronicling your time here in such a beautiful and sympathetic way. So thank you very much for that. Thank you, Jane, for a wonderful conversation. And we have a small token to give you both.